What if your quiet home built with your own hands was suddenly marked for demolition by a clipboard-wielding tyrant and a fake vote you never cast? This isn't just a fight over land, it's a war against corruption, deception, and the abuse of power. One man stood alone until the truth made him unstoppable. Let's begin story. Point 1. The ambush at dawn. Setting: a remote stretch of desert land on the outskirts of Sedona, Arizona. Main character: Marcus Hale, a widowed ex-wildland firefighter and former federal disaster logistics officer. At 5:47 a.m., the stillness of the desert broke. The rising sun cast long shadows across Marcus Hale's dusty front yard, the scrub brush glowing orange in the dawn. But the stillness didn't last. Gravel crunched like bones beneath tires as three sleek, black SUVs rolled up his dirt road without headlights, dust clouds rising behind them like specters. Marcus stood barefoot on his porch, holding a mug of half-drunk coffee, a sliver of steam curling into the air. He blinked, trying to decide if he was still dreaming. But the dogs were barking, all three of them Yeller, Coda, and Duke, in a frenzy, their hackles raised as if they knew a predator had entered their territory. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He watched. The vehicles came to a synchronized stop at the base of his drive, near the boulder he'd carved with the initials of the wife he'd buried 4 winters ago. A chill that had nothing to do with temperature worked its way up his spine. This wasn't a visit. This was a show of force. The first door opened and out stepped HOA President Karen Wexler, dressed in a sharp gray suit like she was headed to a courtroom or a battlefield. She was flanked by 2 oversized men in tactical polos and sunglasses despite the early light. One had a tablet, the other cracked his knuckles without breaking eye contact. Behind them, a man in a blazer stepped out holding a clipboard. He was younger, clean-shaven, and wore the cocky smirk of someone who never bled for anything. Marcus set his coffee down on the porch railing. "Mr. Hale," Karen said without preamble, striding forward, "you are being served notice of property reassignment under Article 17 of the Willow Ridge Beautification Directive." Marcus tilted his head. "Come again." Karen gave a tight smile that never touched her eyes. "Your land is now part of a designated community improvement project. You have 48 hours to vacate. Demolition crews arrive Thursday morning." The wind picked up, scattering red dust across her polished shoes. Marcus said nothing. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his voice stayed calm. "You're joking." "I assure you, this is real," said the clipboard guy, stepping forward and handing him a red stamp folder. "Per HOA authority granted under the Emergency Redevelopment Clause, your property has been annexed for public use." He flipped it open and scanned the legalese. The words meant nothing and everything. It was a death sentence in paperwork. Karen continued, "You may collect any sentimental items. The HOA is offering a complimentary storage unit for 30 days. Marcus laughed. Not a chuckle, the kind of sharp, dry laugh you let out when rage is the only thing holding you upright. "You're offering me a storage unit for the house I built with my own hands, on land my father left me. It's no longer yours, Mr. Hale. The community has voted." "I am the damn community," he growled. The clipboard man stepped back. Karen didn't flinch. She leaned in just slightly, like she could smell the fight boiling under his skin. "This project benefits everyone. Don't make this harder than it has to be." One of the guards reached for something under his jacket, a move Marcus didn't miss. It wasn't a gun, but it didn't need to be. It was a message. Marcus stepped back inside his house without another word. He shut the door gently and locked it. Then he descended the stairs to the basement, passing framed photos, worn boots, a leather fire helmet with soot still clinging to its edge. Down in the cool dark, behind a workbench and a steel cabinet with a 6-digit code lock, was a case he hadn't opened in years. Inside, old federal maps, sealed documents, photos from emergency command centers, disaster response plans, and most importantly, proof of something they had no clue about. He stared at it for a long moment, the weight of it in his hands. Karen thought this land was just dirt, but it wasn't just land. It was a designated fallback zone from his time with FEMA's Critical Infrastructure Continuity Division. The records were still there, buried in dusty files with faded seals, and they were about to become his shield. He exhaled slowly, blood pounding. "You picked the wrong guy, Karen." Point 2. The strategist awakens. Setting: Marcus's home base, a fortified off-grid ranch in the Arizona desert. Tone: tactical, simmering intensity. with bursts of defiant energy and grim determination. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear that feeling had burned off years ago in wildfire lines and collapsed shelters, but because his mind was on fire. 100 variables, each leading to one inevitable truth. They were trying to erase him with ink and false votes. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He spread out maps across his kitchen table, county boundary overlays, property zoning archives, and an old FEMA grid diagram. Beneath them was a copy of the original land deed, signed in blue ink by a judge who had once shaken his hand and said, "The state will never touch this ground." They just had. He opened an encrypted drive from the steel case. The laptop screen flickered to life, bathing the room in cold blue light. The first file he opened wasn't legal, but personal, a photograph of his wife holding up the sold sign when they bought the land. Her smile in that photo had more power than 1,000 legal motions. He wasn't just defending a house, he was defending a memory. At 3:12 a.m., he placed his first call to retired federal Judge Lena McKinney, a no-nonsense woman who once presided over high-level federal land disputes. She answered after 2 rings. "Marcus," she said, already alert. "It's about the HOA, isn't it? They served me a forged annexation this morning, claimed jurisdiction through some beautification clause. They're bringing demolition crews in 2 days." She didn't gasp. She growled, "You told me last year they were sniffing around. Looks like they finally pounced. They forged the vote, Lena. My signature. Even the notary's name, a guy who's been dead since 2021. Silence for a beat. Bring everything. I'll meet you at the cabin." By dawn, Marcus was already halfway through the red sandstone switchbacks, driving north through jagged ridgelines with a lockbox of documents in the passenger seat and a shotgun behind it. Lena's cabin was buried deep in a canyon pass with a barely visible driveway and no GPS coverage, a place off-grid, off-record, and off-limits to prying eyes. She was already outside, wearing a flannel shirt and a face that could shatter stone. "What clause are they citing?" she asked before he'd even parked. "Article 17, Emergency Redevelopment. They're calling it community reclamation." She scoffed. "You mean seizure by glitter." Inside her study, they spread out everything: forged HOA documents, satellite photos of Marcus's house, the federal fallback designation from Operation Hearthstone, a now defunct infrastructure program that had marked Marcus's land as one of 12 emergency continuity hubs in the Southwest. "That alone is enough to bury them in red tape," Lena said, tracing the Homeland Security seal with a pen. Clause 9C prohibits any modification, annexation, or demolition without federal review. That land is off-limits to non-federal action, period. "We need more than defense," Marcus said. His voice was steady but quiet, like the pause before a backdraft. "We need to make them regret trying." They built it together, a timeline of corruption, a paper fortress as Lena called it. Motion after motion, claim after claim, lined with supporting evidence: real estate fraud, vote tampering, notary forgery, and more. Marcus pulled out an old burner phone and made his next call. Alan Price, a land surveyor and data sleuth who owed Marcus a favor from a shared operation in California wildfires. Alan picked up, groggy. "I need overlays of zoning changes in Sedona's outer perimeter over the last 24 months. Look for parcels that changed hands through shell companies, and run the name Clint Rains." "Rains," Alan said. "That's the guy tied to the Pioneer Hills redevelopment scam." "Exactly. I think he's in bed with Karen and her board. I want names, patterns, and footprints, anything that links him to HOA decisions." Alan whistled. "All right. Give me a few hours." Back in Lena's cabin, the legal printer hummed like a war drum. They filed a cease and desist with the county clerk by noon, attached with notarized proof that Marcus's land had opted out of the HOA before it was even formed. Then came the temporary restraining order citing the dead notary and forged vote. And finally, they invoked the federal fallback exemption under the original Operation Hearthstone files. It was a labyrinth, and Marcus made sure every road in that maze was a trap. Then came the moment of dread. Back at the county recorder's office, Lena's contact, a clerk named Sheila, called, voice shaking. "Marcus, the HOA just filed another resolution. Backdated. It shows your property voted in unanimously last year. It's stamped, but it's not yours." "Let me guess," he said. "Same forged signature. Worse, they used your late wife's, from a document over a decade old." The blood in his veins turned to ice. The sound of his heartbeat thundered in his ears. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, with quiet precision, he said, "That's the line. That's the last line." Lena reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "They made it personal. Now we make it public." And just like that, the war escalated. They were no longer defending land. They were going on offense with truth, with evidence, and with fury. Marcus didn't believe in half measures. If Karen and her shadow board thought they could forge signatures, weaponize paperwork, and bulldoze someone's legacy while hiding behind neighborhood newsletters and landscaping jargon, then they had never met someone like him. The public would. By 8 a.m., Marcus was back in his studio war room now, walls lined with blueprints, satellite photos, and a corkboard packed with strings and thumbtacks tracing links between Karen Wexler, Clint Raines, and over a dozen property reacquisitions that had all occurred under the same HOA clause, Article 17. Each time, the landowner had folded quietly, alone, outnumbered. But Marcus wasn't alone anymore. Lena sat on the porch, working through legal filings. Meanwhile, Marcus compiled a digital dossier, scanned court motions, audio clips of Karen at HOA meetings, emails recovered through Alan's sweep, and video footage grainy but clear showing HOA reps walking through his yard without consent, spraying red X's across his deck. He saved the worst for last, a still image of the newly filed HOA gala poster. Center stage was a glossy mock-up of a community serenity park with a dotted red line slicing through it right where his house stood, in bold text underneath, Phase 1, Hale Property Clearance. Marcus posted it, not anonymously, not cautiously, but with full, deliberate force. "This is my home. They want to destroy it with forged votes, fake names, and a bulldozer. Not for the community, for control. My name is Marcus Hale. I've lived here for 19 years. I built this house by hand, and I'm not backing down." He sent it to local reporters, watchdog organizations, Arizona landowner forums, and one Reddit thread notorious for exposing corrupt HOA letters. Within 3 hours, it was viral. The comments were savage. They circled his house like a target. "These people need to be in jail. I've been in a whole nightmare too. This guy is a hero. Karen is the final boss of HOA letters, and she just picked a fight with John Wick in boots." Marcus's inbox filled with hundreds of messages. At first, it was just sympathizers, but then something shifted. People started sharing their own HOA horror stories of unjust fines, forced compliance, even threats. One message hit especially hard. It came from a woman named Jules, who lived 2 blocks from Marcus. She had barely spoken to him in 5 years, but now she wrote, "I never said anything before, but they fined me $1,200 for non-neutral backyard colors. It was a blue hammock. I couldn't fight it. I'm with you now." Then came Tom, a retired Marine who'd lived near the ridge for 3 decades. The HOA had tried to evict him for a tool shed he'd built before the neighborhood even had paved roads. And Leslie, a single mom of 3, sent photos of her torn-up yard, her fence ripped out while she was at work. "They said it didn't match the neighborhood vision," she wrote, her voice trembling through the voicemail she left. Marcus compiled everything, every story, every document, every photograph. He sent the package to Lena. She replied with only 5 words. This just became a class action. They filed the motion within 24 hours. 13 homeowners joined immediately. A week later, it was 32. The court took notice, fast-tracked it, gave them a preliminary hearing. Karen's side responded, not with evidence, but with intimidation. Marcus's mailbox was knocked over again. A rock shattered one of his motion sensors. A stack of new HOA violation notices appeared taped to his truck windshield, this time citing dust levels, gate width, and an unapproved perimeter design. He installed new surveillance, night vision cameras, thermal imaging, cloud backups. The next time they stepped foot on his land, it wouldn't just be evidence, it would be ammunition. Then, the most brazen stunt yet. A drone buzzed over his roof just after dusk. It hovered too long, too steady, ignoring warning signs and alarms. Marcus calmly walked out with a handheld signal disruptor, pointed it upward, and flipped the switch. The drone dropped like a stone into a patch of dry brush. He retrieved it, pulled the memory card, and found 5 full minutes of footage: his house, his yard, his dogs, and in one frame Karen herself, standing across the ravine with a tablet. Marcus smiled. He made 5 copies of that footage and distributed them to the court, local police, and to media contacts. He didn't post it yet. That was for trial day. Meanwhile, HOA lawyer Aaron Breener filed a desperate cease and desist claiming Marcus was harassing board members. Marcus responded with drone footage of his well casing being tampered with by 2 hooded figures at 3:00 a.m. The tide was turning. Karen and her inner circle weren't prepared for exposure. They thrived on fear, silence, and isolation. But now, with every angry post and every brave neighbor stepping forward, the cracks in their armor widened. Lena looked over the growing case file, her glasses low on her nose. "They brought paperwork," she said. "We're bringing firepower." Marcus nodded. "Let's see if they survive daylight." Marcus was cleaning the barrel of his grandfather's old .3006, a ritual more than a necessity, when his phone lit up with a call from Mike Noland, his closest neighbor and a rancher who'd once mended Marcus's fence after a flash flood. The voice on the other end was tight with panic. "Marcus, you need to get down to the Willow Ridge Community Center. Now, it's bad." No other context, just the sound of fear, raw and immediate. Marcus threw on his canvas jacket, slung his go bag over one shoulder, and drove like a thundercloud down the washboard road that separated his quiet solitude from the chaos Karen called progress. Dust plumed behind his truck in long golden streaks. What he found when he walked into the center nearly made him drop his keys. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a celebration. The fluorescent lit room had been transformed into a full-blown HOA gala, silk banners reading "Future of Willow Ridge," ice sculptures, catered hors d'oeuvres, and a podium with Karen Wexler front and center, flanked by half the board and a real estate branding team from out of town. But it was the poster board near the stage that stopped Marcus cold. A glossy rendering displayed a park blueprint, all manicured trees and fake serenity. In the center, under the words "Willow Commons, Phase 1, was a photo of his house, circled in red with a dotted line running straight through his kitchen. He felt the heat rise in his chest, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't yell, didn't storm the stage. That's what they expected. That's what Karen wanted to make him: the angry recluse, the extremist, the man too stubborn to evolve. So instead, Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, silent as stone, and started recording. Karen's voice echoed across the room. "Thanks to our generous donors and the support of Citizens for Open Green Initiatives, a fake committee Marcus had already traced back to a P.O. box rented by Clint Raines' secretary. We're transforming underutilized land into shared beauty." Underutilized land. His jaw twitched. That underutilized land had hosted displaced families during a flash flood 3 years ago. It had solar, rain capture, and a perimeter security system better than most municipal offices. But to Karen, if it didn't fit the HOA's aesthetic, it didn't belong. She moved her hand in a theatrical gesture toward the demolition map. "This marks a new beginning. For all of us." Marcus slipped out before the applause hit. He didn't drive home. He drove north back to Lena's cabin. She opened the door before he even knocked, eyes already narrowed. What did she do now? He dropped the phone into her hand. "Watch." The video showed Karen gesturing over the rendering, smiling smugly. The still shot he took of the board with his house labeled "Demolition Zone" was even worse. Lena stared for a long moment. Then she handed him back the phone and said, "They just handed us the match. Let's build the bonfire." That night, Marcus opened a folder marked Plan C, a file he had built 6 months ago when he first suspected something darker lurking beneath HOA's sudden land pushes. It wasn't just suspicion. It was intuition, carved into him after years of handling disaster logistics and watching people twist crisis into opportunity. Inside the folder was a network map, strings of names, LLCs, donation trails, political contributions. And at the center of the web, Clint Raines, a smiling shark who had been quietly acquiring land around Sedona for almost a decade. Karen wasn't the ringleader, she was the tool. Marcus had emails linking Raines to board members. He had a voicemail Karen left by accident, where she said, "Once Marcus's place is flattened, the rest will fall like dominoes." He created a new email account, masked his IP, and sent the entire package to 3 investigative journalists, 2 government oversight groups, and a local news anchor he knew would bite first and ask questions later. The subject line was simple: "Sedona HOA engaged in forgery, fraud, and land seizure scheme. Here's proof." He also attached a still image of the demolition board with his home marked like a tactical strike target. It went nuclear. Within hours, the story exploded across social media and local headlines. The video of Karen at the gala made it onto the nightly news. A Reddit thread titled "HOA Villain Karen Targets Veterans Land for Fake Park" hit the front page in less than 6 hours. Public opinion flipped overnight. But that wasn't the most important result. The floodgates opened. Neighbors Marcus had barely spoken to began reaching out. A teacher fined $800 for a slightly faded welcome mat. An elderly couple cited for growing tomatoes in non-designated beds. A veteran threatened with foreclosure over an RV hookup his wife needed for medical transport. The stories came pouring in, and with them, copies of violation letters, photographs, court threats, and in some cases recordings. Lena grinned as she flipped through the new material. "We've gone from defending your land to burning down a criminal enterprise." Marcus leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "They lit this fuse," he said. "Now they get to watch it run." The courthouse in Yavapai County wasn't large, but that morning it felt like the center of the universe. Marcus stood outside just past 8 o'clock a.m., arms folded, boots planted, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans, simple, sharp, and steady. He wasn't just a man defending his home anymore. He was the face of resistance, a wall that wouldn't fall. At his side, Judge Lena McKinney clutched a weathered leather briefcase that had seen more federal hearings than most active attorneys. Inside it were 3 neatly tabbed binders, one labeled evidence, one labeled federal protections, and one labeled contingency. Across the lot, Karen Wexler exited a luxury sedan wearing a powder blue pantsuit, flanked by her attorney, Aaron Breener, a sleek legal snake with a $1,200 haircut and a $1,000 smirk. He didn't smirk for long. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, concerned residents, off-duty sheriffs, even a few former HOA members sitting stiffly in the back row. Tension hung in the air like the moment before a monsoon hits. You could feel the pressure in your teeth. Judge Anita Dalton entered promptly at 9 o'clock, her black robe flowing like the curtain call of a play no one wanted to be in. Her reputation was ironclad: zero tolerance for drama, deception, or drawn-out ego contests. Perfect. The hearing opened with a readout of the charges brought against the HOA: unlawful property seizure, forgery, harassment, abuse of power, fraud. Karen's lips pursed tighter with every syllable. Breener looked like he was waiting for a fire alarm to excuse him. Lena stood first, composed and cutting. She began by presenting the forged annexation vote, complete with side-by-side comparisons of Marcus's signature from official documents and the altered one used by the HOA. Then came the notary, a man named Richard Holtzman who, according to Lena's next exhibit, had died in 2021, complete with obituary and death certificate. Breener tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, I believe this." Judge Dalton raised one hand, silencing him like a maestro. "Let her finish." Next came the satellite overlays, showing Marcus's home predating the HOA's jurisdictional map by 6 years. Then video footage, grainy but clear, of Karen at the gala pointing to the Phase 1 demolition poster, grinning like a real estate reaper. Karen flinched. The courtroom buzzed. She referred to Mr. Hale's home, Lena said, pausing for emphasis, as a shack to be flattened. This was no community project. It was a coordinated land grab. Then Lena delivered the killing blow, a printed email chain between Karen, Breener, and Clint Raines, the developer. One message, in Karen's own words: "If we push Hale out before the end of Q2, Clint promised us the developer's fee." Boom. Gasps in the gallery. Breener went pale. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish that just realized it was in a net. Judge Dalton looked up slowly. Her voice was calm, but colder than steel. "That one sentence may shift this from civil abuse to criminal conspiracy." Breener objected. "These emails were not lawfully obtained. They were provided by a whistleblower on the whole board," Lena said, "under Arizona's protection statutes." Karen's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the edge of the defense table. Marcus remained silent. Then came the twist no one expected. The judge ordered all digital communications from the HOA to be submitted for review. Within the hour, a court tech wheeled in a printer cart stacked with HOA records, thousands of pages printed from internal logs. Among them, a new resolution, filed just 3 weeks prior, from a shell organization called Willow Commons Community Restoration Initiative, the same committee that headlined the gala. The motion, another attempt to seize Marcus's land. The signature, Marcus's deceased wife's name. The room went dead quiet. Lena didn't raise her voice. They used the name of a dead woman, his wife, to justify legal seizure. That's not just cruel. That's monstrous. Marcus gripped the table's edge. His knuckles turned white. He didn't speak. His silence was louder than a scream. The judge took off her glasses. Mrs. Wexler, your HOA is now in contempt of court for violating injunction orders, and as of this moment, I am issuing a federal referral for further investigation. Breener tried to resign on the spot. The judge let him. Karen stood, lips trembling. This is a mistake. I was only trying to improve the neighborhood. You tried to steal a man's home. The judge snapped. You tried to profit off it, and you did so with fraudulent documents, forged signatures, and a reckless disregard for the law. At that moment, a new video was handed to the clerk. Footage from Marcus's security feed the night Karen and four hired workers arrived on his land with a bulldozer. Karen screamed on camera, called Marcus a squatter, and ordered the crew to start leveling the porch. They drove the bulldozer forward, right over a fake utility marker Marcus had labeled high-pressure gas line. The crew scattered. Karen panicked. The operator cursed and jumped out. The court erupted in whispers. The judge didn't need a gavel. Her glare was enough. Court will reconvene in 48 hours, she said, at which point this board will present a full financial disclosure, including all communications with Mr. Raines. And you, Mrs. Wexler, she added, are now under a temporary restraining order. You are not to contact Mr. Hale or step within 500 feet of his property. Marcus exhaled for the first time in hours. He didn't smile. Not yet, but the tide had turned not just in court, but in the court of public opinion. And the best part, he still hadn't shown them everything. The calm that followed wasn't peace. Not yet, not fully. It was the eerie silence after a wildfire has passed, the smoke still clinging to the air, the ashes still warm underfoot, the horizon just beginning to clear. Marcus stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the sun crest over the red mesas like it had done for 1,000 years before whole maps and falsified votes ever existed. His land, his home, his breath still here. But the war wasn't done until the last sword was sheathed. 2 days after the hearing, 3 federal vehicles rolled into the Willow Ridge HOA office. No lights, no sirens. Just plain, bulletproof SUVs and agents in soft-shell tactical vests with DHS insignias hidden behind civilian jackets. Karen Wexler was back in her office like nothing had happened, barking into a phone when the agents walked in. 15 minutes later, she was escorted out, folder in hand, cheeks flushed with indignation. No cuffs, not yet. But everyone in the building knew what was coming. Marcus watched the footage later. A neighbor's ring cam had caught the whole thing. Karen clutching her handbag like a shield, her voice rising in protest. I have rights, she shouted as the agents shut the doors behind her. They didn't need to respond. The federal order said it all. Back at the ranch, Marcus received a delivery in a sealed envelope hand-delivered by a federal courier. Inside was the official reinstatement notice from the Department of Homeland Security. Emergency fallback designation reactivated for Site Echo 12 under Order 22 FIP for 9/1. That meant his property was now federally protected. No local authority, no county clerk, no HOA, no real estate developer could touch 1 inch of it without explicit written approval from Washington. He mounted the new metal sign just past his gate. Federal Designation Zone. Entry restricted. Order 20 to FIP-491. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about making a statement. You tried to bury me under paper. I responded with fire. The media tore through the hole like a dust storm through brittle pine. Karen Wexler, Clint Raines, and HOA board members were named in a formal civil conspiracy investigation. Emails surfaced detailing backdoor deals, hush payments, and multiple instances of using HOA policy to force elderly residents into selling their land below value. Reporters camped outside Karen's gated neighborhood. Residents who once muttered their complaints in private now flew Karen-free zone flags on their porches. Some even planted signs that read, "We stand with Hale." The HOA tried to regroup, called for an emergency board meeting. No one showed up. They couldn't even meet quorum. The board collapsed within a week. 3 members resigned, 1 left the state. Raines' development project was frozen under federal audit. Karen's personal assets were flagged for review pending restitution claims from multiple victims, including Marcus. Lena sat on Marcus's porch, sipping black coffee out of a chipped enamel mug. She glanced at the growing stack of media requests on his table and smiled. "You ever think your quiet retirement would turn into a constitutional throwdown?" Marcus shook his head. "Didn't think I'd need a drone army to keep a deck I built myself." They both laughed for real, this time. But Marcus didn't celebrate with champagne. He didn't make victory speeches. He held a barbecue. Simple. Wood fire, smoked ribs, tables made of plywood and sawhorses. Neighbors came out, even the quiet ones who had once watched from behind closed blinds. They brought stories, casseroles, dusty lawn chairs, and, in one case, a harmonica. Mike toasted him with a beer. "Thought you were a bunker nut for a while. Now I know you were just the one man with enough backbone to say no." Marcus just nodded. He didn't do it for applause. He did it for the principle. The last time he went into the basement, he opened the steel cabinet one final time. Inside, tucked between the Operation Hearthstone documents and a dusty military thumb drive, was one file he had never used. A contingency so drastic he had hoped it would never see light. He locked it back up. He hoped he'd never have to open it again. But he also left the camera system running, the alarm grid active, the cloud storage live. Because bullies don't disappear. They regroup. They change names. They file new paperwork. They wait for the world to get distracted. But not Marcus. He knew what had almost happened, and he knew that it would happen again somewhere, to someone else, unless people stood their ground. That night, under a sky dusted with stars, Marcus walked the perimeter of his land. Every sensor blinked. Every post stood straight. Every inch of ground beneath his boots was earned, defended, and his. Not because a law said so, but because he refused to yield. Karen came at him with lies, threats, and a borrowed bulldozer. He answered with truth, strategy, and an unshakable will. She underestimated him. They all did. But now they knew. And they'd never forget. Valuable lesson from Marcus Hale's story. Stand your ground, because when you know the truth, preparation and courage can defeat even the most powerful lies. Marcus's story is a modern parable about the abuse of power, the importance of legal knowledge, and the strength of individual resistance. He teaches us that bullies don't always show up with fists. Sometimes they arrive in black SUVs with clipboards and forged paperwork. But no matter how official they look or how loud their threats are, they crumble in the face of truth, persistence, and community. The lesson isn't just about fighting a corrupt HOA, it's about recognizing that systems can fail when they go unchecked. It's about the responsibility of ordinary people to hold the line when institutions lose their way. And it's about the power of strategy over reaction, evidence over emotion, and community over silence. Most of all, it reminds us, you don't need to raise your voice when you're armed with the truth. You just have to stand tall and not move.